as with last week, I want to start with my favorite interpretation of Parsha. Can you hear it?
Oh no, not he. How you can accuse him is a mystery. Save him, save me. Benjamin is straighter than the 12 palm tree. I hear the steel drums sing their song. They're singing, man, you know you got it wrong. I hear the voice of the yellow bird singing in the tree. This is quite absurd. Oh yes, it's true. It's true. Benjamin is straighter than the big bamboo. No ifs, no buts, Benjamin is honest as coconuts. Sure as the tide washed the golden sand, Benjamin is an innocent man. Ooh. Sure as bananas need the sun, we are the criminal guilty ones. Oh no, not he. How you can accuse him is a mystery. Save him, take me. Benjamin is straighter than the 12 palm tree. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh no, not he. How you can accuse him is a mystery. Save him, take me. Benjamin is straighter than the 12 palm tree. Sure as the tide washed the golden sand, Benjamin is an innocent mother. Sure as bananas need the sun, we are the criminal guilty ones. Oh no, not he. No. How you can accuse him is a mystery. Save him, take me. Benjamin is straighter than the 12 palm tree. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh no, not he. How you can accuse him is a mystery. Save him, take me. Benjamin is straighter than the 12 palm tree.
That's ridiculous, but so much fun.
So great to see it in close up and see the faces they make.
I know. So, yeah. I always wondered, do we know that coconuts are honest? I've never heard a coconut tell the truth. But
People don't lie.
that's true too. So this week's Torah portion, Parashat Vayigash, which opens up, if you recall last week, ended with the accusation that Benjamin, the Jacob's youngest son and Joseph's only full-blooded brother, Joseph has framed him for theft, basically. So, and then it cuts off. So this week starts with Judah insisting that Benjamin did not, there must be some mistake. Benjamin would not do this, and that Benjamin cannot be thrown in jail, that the rest of the brothers cannot go home without him. I saw a kind of interesting midrash on this that suggested, because Judah was the one who suggested selling Joseph into slavery in the first place, or who actively did it or whatever, then he is obliged here to offer himself up as a slave to Joseph in exchange for Benjamin's freedom, which, like, so there is a sort of poetic justice to that. I'm not sure that I like that reading as much as the more I don't know, generous reading of Judah, that he's been on sort of this like slope toward more compassion and righteousness, that he, you know, initially selling Joseph into slavery was in itself like a step up from the other brothers who wanted to straight up kill him. And then, you know, and now he's like really learned even that is not so great, and he's willing to sacrifice himself for Benjamin. But it is an interesting connection between, you know, his actions back then and his actions now. So eventually, after all of this, Joseph, after the Calypso song, Joseph sees that that his brothers have truly changed and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for Benjamin, and you know, that they have remorse. They say in their exchange too, it's not in the song, but in the Torah, they say, like, you know, his brother is already gone. If we go back without the only remaining child of our father's favorite wife, so, you know, something like this, like, really it will kill our father. We can't do it. So he knows not only do they maybe like Benjamin more than him, but that they truly feel remorseful for their behavior toward him those years ago. So so he reveals himself to them. He sends out all of the Egyptians that were in the room, which I think is really interesting, because theoretically they all know he's a Hebrew. So I don't know, I guess just because it's an intimate family moment, he sends out all of the interpreters and everyone and speaks to his brothers in Hebrew, which he had previously not been doing. And he's very magnanimous about it. I love this. It was to preserve life that God sent me before you. For another 5 years, there will be neither plowing nor harvest, and God sent me before you to ensure your survival in this land. That the whole thing, he's like, this was all part of the plan. It turned out to be good that I was here in Egypt, and he's so willing to just forgive his brother's treatment of him, not only to move past the trauma of the action, but to say, like, actually it was a good thing, which is pretty incredible. And then, so sure enough, he says, since the famine's not going anywhere and I have all the food here, you might as well move here. Go get our father, come back. And they do. So this Parsha ends with the whole family settling in the land of Goshen in Egypt, which is where they still live. That's what becomes the slave settlement in Exodus. And they live and live quite comfortably for at least that generation. They also, another midrash I came across was that, so the section tells us that 70 members of Jacob's household came and settled in the land. And I've never sat and counted. I don't even know, like, how you could count, because so often they don't tell you, like, the women or children, how many wives or daughters there were. So it would never occur to me to check that math. But apparently one of the rabbis say if you count them, it's actually 69. And then they offer different explanations for who that 70 is. The one I liked best was that it's God. God is the 70th. I liked that a lot. And then I forget what the other ones were, who the other suggestions were, but I guess Joseph, what didn't come with them, but he's already there. So he's, I don't know. There were others, but anyway, it was interesting. So that's the Parsha. What struck you? Does anyone have a particular place they want to start? A question, a verse to parse?
I was wondering about the math because it didn't add up. It said that, 66 people, this counted 66, and then counting, I don't know, Benjamin and Joseph, it was 70.
Right.
However, that it didn't add up. So I like the interpretation that it's God, because God, on his way, Israel has God comes to him in a dream or in the night and says, I will go with you.
Right.
Don't fight this. This is what we want, what I want, and I will be with you.
Right.
Was that in relationship to going to Goshen? I missed that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in chapter 46. First, when the brothers tell him to go, he sets out, but he stops in Beersheba first.
Okay.
And then God comes to him in a dream and says, I am God, God of your father. Do not fear to go to Egypt, for I will make you there a great nation, and I myself will go with you to Egypt.
Okay, because I missed that somehow when I was reading. Kind of,
Yeah.
that is not attached firmly to my shoulders right now, but so I was wondering, because this was the only grand journey that God did not seem to be part of, and that they left the promised land and to Egypt, and when they go back to the promised land, obviously God is involved. But that clarifies. Thank you. I missed that.
And it's also, that's a huge, oh, sorry, Dave, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
No, continue.
I was just going to say, it's a huge facet of the development of monotheism here, right? Because previously, everybody had local gods. And when you visited a new place, you might still pray to your God back home, or carry your own household idols with you or whatever, but you would also pay homage to the God of that locality. And so by having only one God, we really have the first God that travels with us. So that's momentous here, that God says very directly, I will come with you. Not just that, now we understand God in a much, generally speaking, most, modern Jews or whatever understand God in a much more expansive way, that God already is everywhere and is, the life force of the universe or whatever. But in the ancient times, that's such a foreign concept. So it's not just that God already is in Egypt, or that God is everywhere and God is the God of everything, but that their God will go with them. They have one who goes with them everywhere and watches their journey. So what were you gonna say, Dave?
Mine came a little earlier in, see if I can find it. Chapter 45, verse 24. As he sent his brothers off on their way, he told them, do not be quarrelsome on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I was kind of curious as to why he phrased it that way. Is he saying, implication, you're a bunch of squabbling jerks and I don't want you to delay the journey? Or is he saying something along the lines of, in case it crops up that you start playing the blame game for who's responsible for what happened to me, don't do that? Or is he saying the land you're about to travel through doesn't really care for us, and you want to keep a low profile, don't pick fights? I couldn't decide why he would bother telling them. I could see him saying, hurry it up, I want to see my father. But why tell them don't be quarrelsome? So
well, Rashi basically offers all of the explanations you just said. he says, don't busy yourselves with halachic discussions, which is an acronym. They wouldn't have halachic discussions, but it says, lest the road become unsteady for you. So focus on your way, I think could be also interpreted as you said, like, this road is not super safe. So like, pay attention, be quiet, just go. Another interpretation Rashi brings from the Talmud also says, do not take long steps, and, don't be gossiping. Again, just focus on getting there. Do not stay overnight in the town. Like hurry up. I want you to go get my father and come back. And then lastly, he says, but the plain verse must be explained thus. They felt the shame of what they had done to him, and he feared that they might quarrel on the way back about his having been sold, playing the blame game, and he did not want that. So Rashi says yes, basically all of what you just suggested are very possible explanations.
Just
and
seems
then
a little gratuitous to me.
To add that,
Yeah, to say don't be quarreling. Don't.
Yeah.
I was just curious about that because I looked up the word in my. I don't know if I can find it.
Your concordance.
Wrong one.
BP.
E-sword, and they said that ragaz, I got it pronouncing it right, was trembling.
Yeah.
And that would imply fear. And so what I was personally wondering is, was he saying, you don't have anything to fear because this is my land and my protection goes with you? But I wasn't, again, I wonder why he would say that, particularly because they haven't raised that issue, seems to me.
Oh, why would he say that? I think, okay, so Ramban touches on that fact specifically, that it means trembling and fear. And that he connects it to the previous verse, that they are laden with grain, bread, and provisions, that they might be worried, and he's maybe like worried by proxy, that they will be attacked and robbed because they have so much food.
Oh, okay.
And so he's saying, like, don't taggle, don't tarry and whatever. But also don't worry, just like go get home as fast as you can, share the food, and come back.
Okay.
So
yeah, I hadn't thought to tie it to the previous one. That makes sense.
Yeah. So there's lots of the rabbis have lots of potential answers. There's not a clear. I think I am inclined, or my initial reading was as Rashi says, the plain sense of the verse, that do not be quarrelsome. Like, he knows, even though they've come a long way, they're still, a band of 11 brothers, and they probably bicker, and he's like, just let's stop this. We're adults now.
It did sort of sound like something that a Jewish mother would say.
Yeah.
Kids, and maybe he is in a position in several different ways of looking at it as an elevated authority figure, and wanted to make that clear. But I like some of the interpretations that David gave as well. That was.
I interpreted it as sort of, I know I'm your younger brother, but I'm important and I can tell you what to do. And I know you can be bickering, and so don't do it.
Yeah.
It's one more way. Yes, I've forgiven you, but I haven't forgotten.
Right.
You guys are.
It also makes sense.
it kind of reminds me of when my youngest niece tells her older sister or me and Philip, stop squabbling if we disagree with each other or with her. No squabbling.
I was going to say, my interpretation might be informed by my being the youngest of several siblings. And I like to tell them what to do.
Yeah, Dave.
Got another one if no one else does.
Okay.
When God appears to Jacob, why does he call Jacob Jacob instead of Israel? Because the history of it seemed to me that it was either God or God's messenger who said, you will no more be called Jacob, you'll be called Israel. And if this is God, why didn't God say Israel, Israel?
And why does the text, Chazal calls him Israel in these two verses? Israel set out with all that is his, and God called to Israel, and he said, Jacob, Jacob.
Is he trying to say, like, I knew you when you were just Jacob,
Maybe.
and I made you Israel?
Let's see. Ramban says it would be proper that he call him by this glorious, that God call him by the glorious name of Israel. And so indeed, the text does call him Israel 3 times in this section. However, God called him Jacob in order to hint that now he will not contend with God and man and prevail, as the name Israel indicates, that there will be no wrestling here. But instead, he is going down to Egypt, which will become a house of bondage until God decides to bring him up again. So the name Israel has this connotation of like the wrestling with the divine and coming out victorious. And now God is saying, don't wrestle. Your family is not going to come out victorious until I decide it's time. So that's Ramban's explanation.
When I read it, I've been trying to discern, and not always successfully, if he's called Jacob when they're really talking to the man, and he's called Israel when they're sort of referring to the whole family that will become the nation,
Which works in some parts of this section, like Israel set out with all that is his. It is talking about him, but also the whole camp, right?
Right.
All of the wives and children that were left behind when the brothers went to Egypt as well. And everybody's going now together. And same a little further down when it says the sons of Israel put their father Jacob and their children and their wives in the wagons. All that together. But why would it say God called to Israel in a vision, Jacob, Jacob? Like here, they're both really talking about the same entity. Like it's not just about Israel, the man, as a symbol. He's calling, God is calling to Israel, the person, as well. And if we interpret it as like, even, when Jacob receives prophecy, that it involves the whole, like you're going down to the house of bondage. Jacob never lives in bondage. So you could still read that prophecy as part of like Jacob as a stand-in for all of Israel. But then why does God not say Israel? Chazal says Israel, God says Jacob. So I don't know.
Question about the very next verse where God is talking to Jacob, Israel, and he says, I myself will go down with you to Egypt. I myself will bring you back, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. So if Joseph is closing his eyes, that implies he's going to die in Goshen. But
yes,
God also promises that he will be bringing him back. So I guess he's talking about his descendants, but It's sort of.
Well, oh, so that's interesting. I like that. I understood it as because Jacob is still buried in Canaan. The body is brought back.
Okay.
And by Joseph's hand. I mean, Joseph makes that arrangement. So he is the last one there with his father when he dies. And then God, through Joseph, I guess, brings him back.
So he's promising Jacob that even though he's going to die in the new country, he will be buried in the.
Yeah, that he will be buried with his fathers.
I wondered about when he made Joseph pledge to him that he would bring him back to be buried with his fathers. Put your hand under my thigh.
That's common in the Torah or in the Bible. That was like the, I don't know, the blood brother oath of the day, or like the spit shake of the day, like very intimate. And that's how you like knew you meant it. That's the oath. Yeah. Yeah, the rabbis agree that the I will also bring you back refers to the bones coming to Machpelah.
It's odd that the way the sentence is, but I mean, it seems like you would say Joseph's hand shall close your eyes and I will bring you back. If that be the order that things would happen in. So
Yeah, the Torah loves to be weird ordered weirdly.
But that lack of chronology is very rich because
Yes.
there's a lot you can do with when it's not linear.
Yeah, the other rabbis don't necessarily have something to say specifically about the order. Oh, that's nice. Sforno says, oh, Sforno likes your reading too, Debbie. Not only will I bring you out of Egypt in a coffin to be buried in the Holy Land, but I will also bring your numerous descendants out of there to a good land flowing with milk and honey in the time of Moses. But then he also says, you yourself will not have to worry about any of your affairs while in Egypt, seeing that Joseph will take care of all the mundane matters pertaining to daily life. In other words, you can keep your eyes closed when it comes to mundane matters. So not just that Joseph's hands will close your eyes in the traditional, like putting him to rest when he dies, but also that Joseph will guide you through the remainder of your days.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
What about Joseph's slow but certain acquisition of everything that people owned?
Yeah. It's a little troublesome, huh?
Yeah. And especially there was one line where he took 47, 20, and 21. Joseph gained possession of all the farmland of Egypt for Pharaoh, every Egyptian having sold his fields because the famine was too much for them. Thus the land was passed over to Pharaoh. And he removed the population, town by town, from one end of Egypt's border to the other. What did he do with them? What does that mean?
Let me get to that verse. He removed the population town by town. JPS says the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain here.
Thanks, JPS.
Let's see. What do the rabbis say? He caused them to pass from one city to another city, that they might be reminded that they now had no claim to the land. He settled the people of one city in another. There was no need for scripture to state this except for the purpose of telling you something to Joseph's credit, that he intended thereby to remove reproach from his brothers, because since the Egyptians themselves were strangers in various cities where they dwelt, they could not call them, Joseph's brethren, strangers. So that's Rashi explaining, also he citing the Talmud, that he brings that. Yeah, so there's this tactic we've talked about before in terms of like the Assyrian conquest of Israel, that when you are imposing policies on a population that you are worried they will not like, you mix up that population so that they cannot talk to each other and talk to their friends and plan the revolt. If you put them next to strangers that they don't know if they can trust, they're much less likely to plan your overthrowing. So there might be some of that happening. And you can say, as the rabbis of the Talmud did, it's, for good reason, for Joseph's care for his brothers, that so they won't plan, bigotry against the Hebrews. They'll all feel like strangers in a strange land. But I think there's like a very significant power move happening here.
Yeah, it did seem like the Egyptian population was very meek and mild. I mean, all the food was in the granaries, and they didn't say, well, I'm Egyptian, you need to give it to me too. But they acknowledged that Pharaoh owned all this stuff that he put aside and could do anything he wanted. They sold themselves basically into slavery to their king, to their
God.
Nobody,
Yeah.
and they all did it sort of like, you could picture in an old English movie them doffing their hats to the surf lord or something.
Right.
The other thing that struck me was,
No, go ahead.
that the priests were exempt from that. And,
Which is interesting because in Judaism, right, or in Israelite culture, the priests were the only ones that didn't own land.
But I'm thinking in modern Israel, all the Orthodox rabbis, they don't have to work, right? They're supported by the government. So they
They're
sort of,
heavily subsidized. I mean, they're often their wives work also, but
so they sort of adopted
yeah, the
that.
Egyptian way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. The priests not take over. The priests had an allotment from Pharaoh. Yeah, it's different than the rest of the Torah, how we see Kohanim, which is the same word here. They therefore would not have any. Oh, so it's the same thing though. Chizkuni says, therefore the priests would not have any reason to start a rebellion against Pharaoh, because you can't really move the priests around and separate them from other priests because they have to stay close to the Egyptian temples. So you have to keep them happy because they do have a position of power and comrades that they could stage a revolution with. Yeah, Dave.
Back again to the moving the people to the cities and all Egypt's borders from one end to the other. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, in his translation of the Living Torah, says in his note, he moved the people from the land which they owned, which they no longer owned, to the cities. And that was the meaning of it, which makes a little more sense to me than bodily picking up a group of people and saying, okay, you're in Manassas, now you're going to go live in Woodbridge, and you people in Woodbridge, now you're going to go live in Fredericksburg, and people in Fredericksburg, you're going to Fairfax. If you'd still be with all your friends and you'd have more of a grievance, it seems to me, because you got kicked out of your own home. But this makes more sense. there's no need for you to be on the land because it's not yours and it's not growing anything anyway. 'cause of
Right.
famine.
Well, and so Chis Cooney says that too. Well, not quite that, but similar here, that once they were settled on soil that had never been theirs. Wait, no, this isn't the one I was looking for. This is also true, what Chis Cooney says, but once they were settled on soil that had never been theirs, they would be less capable of returning to soil, which had in the meantime acquired new lessees. Wait, but that's not the one I was looking for. One of these said, that if he didn't want them to feel attached to the land anymore because they didn't own it anymore because he had bought it, and that if they still lived on the farm that had once been theirs, then they would still feel a sense of ownership. And, you know, if such a time comes that things do grow there again, they might feel they have a claim to it, and they had sold it. He didn't want them to feel like they had a claim to it. But now I don't remember which rabbi said that. I can't find it now, but it was in one of the side panel commentaries on Sfaria.
But then he gives them seed to grow stuff that they have to give 1/5 of to Pharaoh.
Yeah. Here we go. Radak. Right. So if they grew on their own land that in the past they had owned outright, then they might feel that they own all of it. And Radak also says, then they would transfer by inheritance to their children. But by moving the people around, Joseph made sure that they would remain aware that they had received it by the largesse of Pharaoh, who had been the true owner and could therefore claim a tax of 20% or 1/5. Which, I mean, I don't know what the ancient agricultural laws in Egypt were. As Debbie said, like there were plenty of feudal systems throughout the world where the king or whoever did own everything already and could make that request at any time. But it seems that maybe that wasn't the policy previously in Egypt, and Joseph instituted it, which makes you wonder why. Like, if it's still going to Pharaoh, I guess that benefits Joseph to some extent, but it's not like he's taking it for himself.
Well, but he has, when it goes to Pharaoh, he actually is the one who has control of it.
I guess
You know,
he's controlling the granaries.
give a bigger portion back to his.
Yeah. And this is why Shai Held calls him the first court Jew. Rabbi Shai Held.
But yeah, because he's showing Pharaoh, see, I'm doing all this for you. You know,
Right.
while at the same time I'm solving the famine problem. Look at all the riches I'm giving you for your treasury, and it's a good way to put it. So did he invent serfdom?
Possibly. It's not a good look for us, I think. Our ancestor invented this system. And compelling people to give up everything for the food that they need to live and that the country has in surplus.
It was taken from them to begin with.
Yeah. Verse 25, 47:25, the English even uses the word serfs, but the Hebrew is just slaves, abadim. So, and it's a positive term, of course, you know, it's because history is written by the winners. Who knows what they actually said, but the people said, "You have saved our lives. We are grateful to my Lord, and we shall be servants to Pharaoh."
while all this was going on with the Egyptians, the Israelites were given land, and that there's nothing in here that says that it was taken away for them for the same reason that the Egyptians
No.
lost land.
No, they are given a parcel of land outright. They are given the food that they need, and presumably when the famine is over, their land grows food, which is maybe then, I don't know, maybe that's the root of the, or I don't know, root, but that's the cause of the resentment against them in the later generation. Like in Rwanda, one of the sociological underpinnings of the conflict in the 90s was that in, I don't know, pre-colonial times, the Tutsis were considered higher class, and the Hutus, no, other way around, sorry, the Hutus were considered higher class, and the Tutsis were like the agrarians. And then the colonialists, the Dutch, I think, or the Germans, whoever colonized that area first, inverted that and made the Tutsis their, ministers or whatever, their buffer tax collectors and whatnot, and suppressed the Hutus. And when the European powers withdrew, there was like this huge power vacuum, and all of this resentment from 200 years of inverted power structure, and it exploded. So, maybe that's part of it here, is like, we were in charge and we let you come in and move in and share our bounty. And then your brother taxed us out of all of our land holdings, robbed us basically, but you got to keep your land holding. And, and now you're more prosperous? I don't think so. And so once they had power back in some way, that, they were quick to enslave the Israelites and make Goshen a ghetto, basically. I mean, the way it's described in Exodus then is not prosperous the way it is described. I mean, briefly, it's not described much at all here, but that they settle in Goshen and they're happy, and they are prosperous as a people in that plot of land. And then in the next, not the next chapter, but the next book in Exodus, it's a slave town, it's a shanty town, it's like a Bantustan, it's crummy. So how that can flip on itself depending on who's in charge and who has money.
Be fair to Joseph, they come and ask him for help. He doesn't just go out and say, oh my gosh, look at the trouble you're in. Here's what we can do. They go to him.
Right, but that's what he's been preparing for. He knew that they were going to need the help. He was ready for that. And in the beginning, he does. Like when the brothers come to him initially, it's because he is just handing out grain.
Right.
And then eventually he decides, I can make a buck this way. And I don't know. Tax is one thing, because theoretically, right, collecting the surplus during the years of plenty was a tax that then helps, right? That's what taxes are supposed to be. They don't go into the pocket of the ruler. They're to be redistributed then in times of social upheaval and go to the people that need them. So he taxed them all during their times of plenty, collected their surplus food, and now he's redistributing it as needed. And so to then continue to tax and say like, okay, we're keeping a tally, and when you have plenty again, we're going to increase taxes by 5% or even 20% is a huge tax raise, but like whatever to make up for this later, but to also sell all your homes and have to move and uproot your families, it's extreme. And that he doesn't do it to his own family, which, I mean, I've never heard of such a thing, that the people related to people in power, the people who already have money and success, don't get taxed fairly. What kind of nation would do such a thing?
Can't imagine.
I couldn't fathom.
Still can't.
So anyway, that's my rant on Joseph Court Jew. We have about 10 minutes left. If anyone has any other questions or verses that caught your eye before we close.
Okay, I have one.
Okay.
This relates to your fascination with vampires. There's a lot of falling on necks and kissing necks and eating on necks.
Back again.
Yeah.
Was it really kissing and weeping, or were they biting?
As far as I know, there's no midrash about biting here, but let's see where it's right after he reveals himself, right? At the beginning of the parsha.
Yeah. First he does it to Benjamin, I think, and then
Yeah, okay, wait.
Well, it does
He
say his-
embraced his brother Benjamin around the neck and wept, and Benjamin wept on his neck.
Damp, but not bloody.
Yeah. No, none of them say. No biting.
no biting.
No biting.
Okay.
Uh,
I guess that's a relief.
yeah. They just like to fall on necks a lot, you know? It's so interesting to me. We'll also see when Jacob dies, Joseph falls upon his father's face. Like, they're so dramatic. They're always throwing themselves down on each other.
They're very demonstrative,
Yeah,
which has continued, I think, to this day.
that Jews like to hug and kiss.
Yeah.
Pinch cheeks. Well, a shayna punum.
And cried.
Yeah. Joseph cries a lot in this, like, half of, last week and this week and next week, these parshiot.
Why wouldn't he? This is pretty emotional. Pretty transformative.
Yeah. His sobs were so loud that all the Egyptians could hear.
Which could just mean the Egyptians were nosy and had their ear up to the door.
If they even had doors.
Right.
Well, they didn't have TV, so.
What else would they be listening to?
Exactly.
Yeah. Which I think the fact that Joseph falls on his brother's necks here, and it's not read as vampirism, only supports my defense of Esau, that he was not trying to bite Jacob's neck, that he is a good guy, and that was the rabbis really grasping at straws to justify Jacob's behavior toward Esau. Because it's the same language in the Hebrew used, that they fall on each other's necks and weep and cry and embrace
I
So
think we understand bat mitzvah now, bat mitzvah.
a vampire bat mitzvah.
Oh, oh, I missed that. Thank you, David.
I was just thinking that the whole vampire thing is a metaphor for how Jews have lasted this long in spite of how many times people have tried to kill them all.
Immortal. Nobody's tried to stake yet. Well, this has been illuminating. But not to the point where we burst into flames in the sunlight.
No sunlight here, it's all cloudy.
Oh, our sun came out. It's supposed to rain this afternoon, but it's pretty nice out right now. So may it stay. But I am gonna eat a chocolate penguin now. So
A what?
a chocolate penguin.
Enjoy it.
So I'll see you all next week. Have a good
Yeah.
afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.
Debbie, be well.